Time, let's get into a couple of other major talkers right now. Pulling up this on social media today, the Associated Press sharing this on X, saying State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said employees will not face discipline for questioning the intelligence community's assessment of Havana Syndrome. This comes as a special Russian intelligence unit could be behind a series of attacks that have left dozens of U.S. officials with mysterious illnesses. That illness, as we just described there, is known as Havana Syndrome. It's been known to cause extreme headaches, dizziness, nausea, and ear pain. Joining us now to talk more about it and the links to Russia is national security expert Hal Kempfer. And Hal, we always appreciate your time here. Let's just first begin with what is Havana Syndrome? What do our viewers need to know?
Well, Lexi, what it is it's been several years now that we've had diplomatic personnel around the world, CIA personnel, State Department, FBI, others, Department of Justice, often stationed at embassies or at diplomatic or involved with diplomatic events. But we've also seen a number of cases here in the United States where all of a sudden they are hit with what becomes this incredible, painful, piercing acoustic, basically attack, if you will. Splitting headaches, loss of balance. Many times there's permanent damage to their inner ear canal where they have balance problems. They have brain fog, all sorts of stuff. Some have been medically discharged or medically retired from the various services. And the question is, what is it? And there was a big investigation throughout the intelligence community looking at this. And they said they weren't sure if it was a foreign country or an actor or something like that. Well, this has been changed with the 60 Minutes report, which included Der Spiegel and a major Latvian investigative report that basically looked at it, and they've narrowed it down to this Russian military intelligence unit called, I think it's 29155. It's a numbered unit. And it's believed that they actually were the perpetrators of these attacks all around the world on U.S. personnel. And essentially, they've been using like a directed energy acoustic weapon, as near as we can figure out, to seriously debilitate U.S. employees, federal employees working around the world in a variety of functions, to include working all the way up to right next to cabinet level ranks. And of course, the news today is that it may have actually slowed up Vice President Harris traveling to Vietnam, because there was a couple of reports of that happening in Vietnam to our personnel in Saigon.
Yeah, Hal, you're bringing up a lot of really great points, and to hear about this, it's really alarming on so many levels. You mentioned the symptoms and the ways that people are affected, but I guess what is the most concerning part of all of this?
Well, the concerning part is if it was, an arm of the Russian government, especially the military intelligence organization, the GRU. By the way, I should mention the GRU is also the same intelligence organization that has been linked to things like using basically various poisons for assassination techniques, doing assassinations outright. As far as things like that goes, to include radioactive substances they've used in assassinations and assassination attempts. So they have a rather scurrilous record, if you will, in terms of what they've been doing. And they've been basically involving this hybrid warfare across the board. So the concern is, what does the U.S. do from here? Where do we go from here? This is a foreign country that has been attacking our diplomatic personnel, been attacking our personnel on U.S. territory around the world. What is the response? And one of the more disturbing things that came out of this report was that apparently the White House, both under the Biden and Trump administrations, had set the bar extremely high as far as what they thought it was, to the point where it was almost impossible to prove a nation-state perpetrator. And of course, now this big report comes out that is basically going to force a lot of things to happen. State Department just said that they will not punish anybody for questioning the previous intelligence community report that wasn't quite determinate on what it was. Although I would point out that some of the agencies had low confidence in the findings of that report that did not point to a foreign state actor being responsible for this.
Yeah, and that 60-minute report, Hal, that has a lot of people talking when it comes to this topic here, and it seems to contradict the report by the U.S. government about Havana Syndrome. What do you think the reason for that is?
Well, I think what it was is that there was a lot of frustration that was expressed in there, to include the Pentagon's lead on that investigative that investigation by the intelligence community looking at this. And the problem was they said unless basically what they did was they kind of went with an evidentiary thing, which is you had to prove it almost beyond a reasonable doubt, which is something unusual in the intelligence community. We're not held to the same standard in intelligence that say a criminal trial court would be held with this reasonable doubt concept. We basically come up with almost a preponderance of the information there. We make an assessment of what it is, and everybody felt pretty I think pretty clear that it was a foreign state actor that was behind it. I don't know if they knew it was a GRU back then, although now it's pretty clear it is this GRU unit. The other thing though that really pointed to them was that one of the individuals that is believed to be part of this unit was actually chased down in a high-speed car chase in Key West, Florida. They found a lot of stuff in his vehicle that would be indicative of something that would be consistent with this sort of technological espionage or sabotage, depending on how you want to interpret it. And of course, his Russian passport. And they've been putting a lot of things together to show that he was probably part of this GRU unit. He was operating here on U.S. soil undercover, a rather elaborate cover. He was a chef, and he'd even appeared on television as a chef. Yet here it was, he was this technical expert in doing things like this. So they did a very exhaustive investigative report and put this out there. And frankly, at this point, now the White House and the U.S. government is going to have to respond to what's out there in this open source, if you will, intelligence report and all the evidence that was brought forth within that, which was truly an international effort across the U.S., going through Europe, working with various journalistic organizations.
Yeah, and you talked about a lot of really good points so far, Hal, but the beams of microwaves or the acoustic sounds, is that really new to the intelligence community, or have certain officials known about some of these capabilities for years?
Well, it's been around for quite some time. Actually, the U.S. Has been working in what we call non-lethal, and I think that's probably or less than lethal technology. One of the things that we had looked at and worked with for a long time is a less than lethal acoustic device, if you will, that can be used for crowd control. So if you have an unruly crowd and they're coming at you, you could use this basically directed energy acoustic device to cause a splitting headache, and hopefully that they would go away from that area. Well, it looks like what the Russians were doing this initially, and this is based on experts who've looked at this. They think originally it was designed as some sort of intelligence gathering device, that they were beaming acoustic energy in order to maybe pick up sound waves of discussions off windows or walls or something like that. That's been around for quite some time. You're literally going back decades that's been around. And that maybe what they did was they realized, hey, we can cause some severe pain with this, looking at some of the acoustic capabilities, if you will. And they've been using it as a directed energy weapon. What's kind of interesting with this, and this is what came out in the investigative report by these journalistic organizations, to include 60 Minutes, was they said the common thread was that they were targeting individuals who were involved with looking at Russia or dealing with Russian matters around the world, who are the highest performers dealing with this. And so they were the ones, that was the common thread they found across different agencies, different organizations, that these were individuals who were making a big difference in looking at matters dealing with Russia, and that was the criteria by which this GRU unit was targeting them. Of course, I mean, part of that, if you were working Russian matters and you weren't targeted, I imagine this morning you're probably wondering why, but that was the common thread that they found.
Yeah, and again, we've talked about so much here. I want to go back, though, just with when it comes to Havana Syndrome, for viewers who might just be tuning in here. How did it get its name? Where'd that come from?
Interesting. The Havana Syndrome was what really came into consciousness, that there was this targeting with these acoustic, directed energy acoustic devices. Diplomatic personnel, U.S. personnel working out of the embassy, I should say, in Havana, Cuba, were initially being hit, or at least we thought that was the first time they were being hit. Now, in the fuller investigation, we find out that it may have actually gone a couple of years before that that U.S. personnel were being hit in Germany prior to Havana. But Havana was when it got the most attention, and since they didn't really have a name for it, they weren't quite sure what was causing it. All they knew it was a problem that was showing up in Havana with our personnel down there. It picked up the name Havana Syndrome, and that is the common name for what this is. There is a couple of other names that are used, but Havana Syndrome is the most common term for it, and that literally goes back to where the symptoms were, these attacks at that time, what we thought initially where they were showing up.
Hal, any final thoughts here that you'd like to share with our viewers, or anything in the moment that the public needs to be fearful of, more aware of when it comes to some of these advanced weapons?
Well, this is one of the, well, first off, it shows the pervasiveness of them. One of the things in the investigation was they weren't sure if it was Russia, China, maybe North Korea. It was a nation state. Iran was thought about at one time. It wasn't quite sure who was behind it. There was even thoughts it might be a non-state actor that could be behind it as well. It wasn't sure. And also they looked at a variety of other things, natural causes. Unfortunately, they started going towards, well, maybe mass hysteria or something. And obviously that was not the case. They were being targeted. They were being hit with this directed energy weapon, and it was by the GRU. The issue is, if the GRU is doing this, we have to look at where does this stand under international law. We now have our personnel being targeted by Russia around the world, and this gets into questions of the U.S. response. Is this targeting, does it rise up to, say, an act of war? And I think that's what the White House has been trying to avoid for quite some time. I will tell you, there's a lot of hybrid warfare that falls beneath the line, so it would not be unusual that we would say, no, this does not rise to that level. But it does rise to the level of things like maybe not Article 5 of NATO, but possibly Article 4 of NATO, where they have to confer on a threat. And this was something that happened in a number of NATO nations, so it was common across NATO. So there's a lot of international legal implications that go on with this. And then, of course, the other part is, how do we protect our personnel from this? And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of procedures. There may be some improvements on diplomatic properties, the homes where diplomats work. There could be a lot of different things, technologically and procedurally put in place to try and mitigate this threat if we can't stop it outright.
Hal, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, all of your insight here, especially with this one, a very alarming topic that a lot of people are starting to talk a lot more about. Retired Marine intelligence officer and national security expert. Hal, thanks so much.
Thank you, Lexi.